That's enough mucking around. Go ahead. Let's go ahead and get started. Enough mucking around. Yep, levels look good. Hopefully everything looks good on your end, because everything looks good on my end. We'll go ahead and get started. In just a second, let's talk about sort of what's been a week. What's going on this week? Something good stuff. We played some D&D last night. Ran it. We saw the end of our festival challenge, so that went really well. And kind of ended on a down note at the festival, though, surprisingly. And just a tendency. Sometimes when you put all that faith in the rolls, sometimes the rolls just don't show up that day. And this was one of those situations. We had a party member get the snot kicked out of him, and got jumped in the marketplace. What else happened? We had some characters get sort of overshown by some of the NPCs. Just this is how the bad rolls go. But we also had some really big highlights. Like we had the quiz aspect, which was a lot of fun, where I had put together some specific questions, 5 different questions using the different intelligence-based skills in D&D. And pulled things like sort of like these minor things or details from the adventure we'd had so far, the 20 previous sessions, and pulled those together and put those in there as multiple choice. If they roll well enough on the skill, it kind of works like millionaire, and you just knock out wrong answers. So if they roll really high, so if they rolled a 20, that meant that they were just going to get the answer, whatever. They rolled a 15. Is going to be a choice between 2. If they rolled a 10, they'd have a choice between 3. If they rolled lower than 10, then they got to choose between all 4. Probably didn't even need it. They did a really great job. I was really surprised how much of sort of like the minor aspects, the minor notes of the campaign, just kind of like detail stuff that they had picked up, which included like the name of a pirate ship from one of the NPCs was formerly the captain of. We had they met like a Warforged automaton who was searching for perfume ingredients, and they remembered the perfume ingredient that that NPC was looking for when they came across them out in the wilderness. Other stuff that we talked about. That there was a specific type of natural thing that happened in the world, and they had picked up one of these as a piece of treasure, and they remembered that. That question was like, what is a tool material that is found in specific wetlands on the island? Which was bog iron. And they had picked up bog iron as a bit of treasure earlier in the campaign, and they did remember that. Though honestly, I kind of gave them that one. I think most of them would have gotten that wrong. I take these off so it's not reflecting in you guys' faces. And I think they probably would have gotten that wrong had I not tipped my hand a little bit, which unfortunately, because one of my players was like, "Oh, I definitely know what this is. I don't need to know what the things are," and wrote it down. I was like, "Well, you should, because you're the one who picked it up," and that clued them into, "Oh, that whatever I chose was not the right thing, because I know that character didn't pick this thing up," knowing that tipping their hand in it is something they had in their possession at some point. So a lot of them are going to put in core light, but Corelight has not come up, and also not a thing that's found in wetlands, which is funny. That is coral, so it's found in coral reefs. Different. So yeah, D&D went fine. We leveled up in my other campaign that I'm playing in on Sunday, so I'm playing in one and running one. So I just finished running. They're about to get out the podium awards for the challenges for the end of this festival event. And they'll go on to the bonfire, and then there's the fox hunt after that, and we'll see what happens during those things. We've already got some things going on. We've got one of our players doing a Pepe Sylvia, trying to figure it out Charlie Day style. Has realized that there's some sort of thing that's probably going on here, and now trying to get to the bottom of it, while other one is still nursing their wounds from basically getting jumped in the marketplace. So yeah, it's gonna be interesting. It's gonna be interesting in the next session. It's going back. The one player that we had who had to step away because of sort of the conflicts with work and things like that. Has the potential that they might be coming back in a few weeks, so that's great. We're going to pull them back into the campaign, and we'll find out whether we're going to do that. If they're going to come back in as their own character, if they're going to come back in as a new character. I think that they are planning on coming back in as a new character. Still trying to figure that out. They had previously talked about maybe dropping into a druid, so they were a rogue previously, and maybe dropping in and being a druid instead. We'll see. I think they in general, as in the party, the group, is a little over concerned with their healing capacity. So they really want the druid for more healing, and I'm like, you probably don't need it. But it's whatever they decide they want. I'm not going to tell them one way or another. All I know is that locked doors are going to become more of an issue now. Though, one's playing an artificer, and I'm pretty sure has lock picking proficiency. Pretty sure. Even though it's definitely something you can do just without proficiency anyways. So, that'll probably be alright. But that's a pretty good segue into what we're talking about today. Which is, we're talking about when to roll, when to hold, and when to maybe fail forward in D&D, and of course, other TTRPGs for game masters of all sorts and stripes and systems. So, one of the things that we want to look at is overzealous roll calling can lead to some very specific but easily avoidable situations. And it is definitely, it's a piece of being a dungeon master or game master that's really hard to master. It's one of those situations in which something is easy to learn but hard to master. Knowing when to roll, when to not roll, when you're, as a dungeon master or game master, where you're calling for checks or deciding not to call for checks, and what to do when the check goes sideways, doesn't do what you thought it was going to do. And that's really easy to kind of understand the basic fundamentals of that when you're just starting out and starting to get your feet under you as a game master. But then there are still situations I run into. I'm pretty good at doing it, but every once in a while I do come across situations where I'm like, I shouldn't have called for a roll there. I should have just let that happen. There's no reason I should have called for a roll there. The way in which that could have failed, whether it did or not, wouldn't have been particularly interesting, and I'm just kind of chewing up table time by doing that. So I probably should have just passed that, especially if it's something. Sometimes I'll be less, oh, do you have proficiency in this thing? And it's like, oh, well, if you have proficiency in, let's say, animal handling, yeah, we're not going to make you roll checks to do this very simple thing with the animals. Like, you know what you're doing. You have some experience with this, you just do it. There's no, unless for some reason the failure of that would be interesting or have some sort of consequence to do anything like that. So yeah, I mean that's sort of the basics. So that's what we're going to talk about. So what does it mean when you call for a roll at the wrong time? Pretty easy to know when to call for rolls, right? There is something that a player character is trying to do, some sort of idea that the player has, whether that's, you know, attack rolls, check rolls, saves, whatever. And they're trying, well, not saves. They're trying to achieve something. You have pretty clear stakes. It's like, okay, if this happens, and then this will happen if you're successful. And then sometimes it's, oh, what happens if you're not successful? And sometimes that's the break point. That sometimes, especially as a newer dungeon master, you don't always think about what might happen if they fail at it. So it's not just a fall flat situation. So when we're calling for these rolls, what are the wrong times to kind of call for a roll? So first one is pretty simple, and that's sort of like, I'm gonna write this out and then I'll pop it over so you guys can see what I'm looking at. There's no sort of consequence or for failure, which can include basically being able to infinitely retry something. This is a very common one I feel like you come across in adventures you pick up to run sometimes, or sometimes your own adventures if you're designing them, especially if you're a newer designer, because I think it's one of the telltale marks of somebody who's clearly been doing some dungeon mastering and game mastering for a while, and somebody who hasn't, is you'll come across like a dungeon room that has a locked door in it, and it's got a high DC on it, but there's nothing that happens if the rogue fails to pick the lock. There's no trap on it, there's nothing like that. And there's nothing that's in here in like the liner notes or anything that says like, oh, if you fail this attempt, like the mechanism seizes and you're not going to be able to open it again. There's really no consequence for failure that's kind of baked in there. And unless you do, as a dungeon master, you do a couple mental cartwheels to kind of be like, okay, what would be the consequence of failing that? Just on paper, there's no consequence for failing it, which means that the rogue can just try again. And so if that's the case, then there's actually, you don't need to roll, because they're going to keep rolling. As long as they can feasibly do it, they're going to keep rolling until they meet the DC and they pick the lock. So you can just kind of skip to that end point. Be like, yeah, you spend some time, you lock it. So you have to make sure that there's some sort of consequence for failure, because if you don't, then the roll's not actually important, especially if it's something they can feasibly do. Now, so that's kind of the first one, where you're calling for rolls at the wrong time. So what is the second kind of situation? Is it any sort of where the failure results in a bottleneck or dead end? This is one where you definitely know if you're looking at adventure, you're picked up somebody's dungeon to play. This is one where you tell, oh, this person has definitely designed dungeons before. Because this will be one that you see, I see very commonly in sort of like what I would consider like neophyte or very, very new dungeon masters or game masters who come across this. And all the adventure kind of funnels in, or the dungeon funnels into one point, whether that's a locked door or something, some sort of challenge, some sort of obstacle that's in the way of the party. And if they don't get through this, they can't continue the adventure. It is put in like Legend of Zelda terms. It's like you gotta have the boss key to get into the boss room. And so if there's one challenge that requires you to get the boss key, the party can't fail that challenge, because if the party fails that challenge, then they don't get the boss key. They don't get the boss key, they can't see the boss, they can't finish the adventure. So that's problematic. Now, obviously, video games are a little bit of a different media. Like, this is, the expected thing is that you will die and then retry and die and retry, but that doesn't translate very well to tabletop RPGs, where when you die, that's your one and done, usually. Unless you've got some powerful resurrection magic on hand, you're kind of one and done. Now, less of a concern once you get into higher levels of play, where death is kind of a misadventure, a misstep, if you will. Like, coming back from being dead is pretty easy, which is not the case for the low levels or for people in general. And we have very few instances of people just coming back from the dead. Doesn't happen very often. So it's very important to not have that sort of bottleneck or dead end in the adventure, to create a single situation in which a pass or fail of the roll is going to either can potentially lock you out of the rest of the adventure, because that is not fun. Now there is some old school mentality in which that is appreciated, but that's maybe a discussion for a different time, and we'll talk about it potentially later. Kind of the idea being that, oh, in the same way the world is not leveled to you, if you can't get through this now, maybe you don't have the skill to do it and you need to come back, or you have to find... But old school play is very, very much about clever play. So they're like, oh, you can't get through the door, you break down the door, you figure out a different way, you make your own door, you stone shape, That's very old school style of play, whereas contemporary D&D, a lot of players don't approach the game from that vector. So they kind of look at the rules and kind of get themselves boxed in a little bit. That's not meant to be derogatory in a way. It's a different style of play. So our failure results in that sort of bottleneck or dead end. And the last one is like an attempt. You know you're calling for a roll at the wrong time because the attempt is too easy or mundane, or it's too difficult or fantastical, I would say. All right. So let's talk about some examples in here. I'm gonna pull you guys over so you guys can see what I've been typing on. Yeah. Don't read ahead, okay? There's stuff in there. Don't look at it yet, man. Relax. Here we go. So ignore all this stuff down here. Obviously, you don't want to look at that. In fact, we'll just put this on a different day. Get out of here. Here's what you're doing. You're gonna, yeah. Page break. There you go. You get out of here. We're not talking about you yet. All right. So we're calling for rolls at the wrong time. We've got that down. Like no consequence of failure. Failing this would actually end up in stopping the adventure from proceeding, which is bad because of bottleneck, or the attempt is too easy or mundane, or on the very other side of the spectrum, it's too difficult or too fantastical for a roll. So let's give some examples of those in play. So no consequence for failure. We talked about that a little bit. We'll go ahead and use the no. You know what? I'm not going to use the lockpicking. Is way too easy to use. It's the go-to example. Let's stretch our brains a little bit more. For an example of that, let's say like an investigation. I like that. Okay, yeah, an investigation check. We'll say investigation check for a secret door the party knows is in the room. So this is definitely number one, for sure. There's no consequence in here. Let's say that then, let's say after clearing out the dungeon. So there's no more monsters in here. There's no traps in the room. So if we make an investigation check for a secret door, the party, let's say they pulled off this piece of information, a note from a dead drow or something. They're in the Underdark. In this sort of complex in the Underdark. Drow complex. They've killed all the drow. They picked up this one note that said, oh, remember to use the secret passage that's in the study or whatever. In the dormitory, wherever it is. So they walk into that room. They've killed everything that's in this dungeon, so they're not worried about being attacked. And they're like, okay, we're going to look for the secret door. Or how to open the secret door. Let's say that. For secret door. So they know the secret door. They know the secret door. They probably can even find it. Like, that's not the difficult part. They need the thing that, like, triggers it to open the book that you pull on the shelf. They need to figure out what that thing is. What do they need to interact with in this room to make the secret door open? So the investigation check for that is, at this point, just kind of silly. There's no consequence for failure. They're going to keep looking for it. They know that there's a trigger for it in this room. I mean, I guess they don't know that. It could not be in there. Yes, it will be in there. I'm the Dungeon Master. It's in there. It is for sure supposed to be in here. So, the party, there's not really any point to checking for it, or rolling for it, because there's no consequence for failure, because all the bad guys are dead. We cleared out this whole dungeon already, except for anything that might be behind this secret door. So they know that they don't have any pressure behind them. So if they fail the investigation check, all they're going to do is re-roll the investigation check. So unless we're going to do some extra, like we say, we're going to do some extra walking as Dungeon Master, mental walking, our little cartwheels, and decide, okay, what is the pressure? What is the consequence for failure? That's us having to sort of improvise that probably on the spot in an adventure. Which is a great use for Wandering Monsters, which is one of the things why I really like Wandering Monsters. Once I understood what they were about. And also, we have a video about that, so if you want to know more about that, go check it out on the channel. It's worth a watch. Where we talk about why I why I, like many people, did not like wandering monsters and random encounters, and then until I understood why they're in the game, like why they were design-wise inserted into the game, which is not something that contemporary D&D tells you. So you'll have to go check out that video. That's all we're going to talk about that. So we know that that's the situation. So they're just going to keep trying until they get it. If that's the case, and I don't have any consequences for them, you just find it. So we might, that's the things where we have to change things around, which we'll get to in a second. So, alright, so that was no consequence or failure. So the failure results in bottleneck or dead, and that's the classic lockpicking one. Let's say that's the classic lockpicking. Listen, can't think of a better idea. Yeah, I got one. Because it's really easy to do this all for exploration stuff. So let's do something that's social. So they have to persuade the NPC to tell them where the cult layer is. And tell them, let's see, the location of the cult layer. So that way we're not ending in the preposition that's a me thing. You don't need to worry about that. So they have to persuade the NPC to tell them the location of the cult layer. The entire adventure is hinging on this. So if they don't get the location of the cult layer, they just kind of have to sit around with their twiddling their thumbs, right? They're just... So obviously, we don't want that in an adventure. That's not great for pacing. It's not fun for your players, and it's probably not going to be fun for Dungeon Master or Game Master unless you have a bunch of random encounters or other stuff that you want to do in town. Now, this might be perfectly reasonable if you're like, you guys failed at it, so you guys have a day to kick around, and we'll do some other sort of side adventure stuff while you guys are still looking around or trying to figure out a way to convince this NPC to tell you what they know. But it is a soft lock. And it's not fun to necessarily, as a player, when you fail a roll and then your recourses for that is to just like, I don't know, I wait a day and then I try to roll higher by bugging this guy. Now, me, as a Dungeon Master now, I'd be like, oh, you need to sweeten the pot and something. You want this guy to talk to you again. You're going to need to bribe him, give him a gift, do a favor for him, something like that. We spin that out into something actionable they can do, but again, this is a lot of Dungeon Master, Game Master. I'm having to do some cartwheels in the background to make things work. Whereas what we wanted to do is just work up front so we don't have to do that. Because there's going to be enough points in the adventure because players are wackadoo and they'll do all sorts of weird stuff and decide to go in lots of different directions and do things you didn't think about. So you're going to already have to improv a lot. I don't want to have to improv what seems like the straightforward through line of an adventure. Like, that's the part that I want the skeleton of. Like, give me that and then I'll improv all the flesh around it. But it's more difficult when I'm also having to make up the basic structure of the adventure or fix the basic structure of the adventure as I'm going. So we had one that's sort of an exploration one with the investigation check. We had something with the persuasion. Let's do, okay, the attempt is too easy or mundane or too difficult or fantastical. I wanted to do this for combat. That's a little bit harder. Just so we hit all tiers. Why not? We hit all those pillars. We have the exploration. We have the social RP. And we're going to have some combat. Just to keep our examples balanced. All right, let's say, like, jumping, table, combat. I say that, but I make players roll for jumping on tables all the time, just because I think it's funny when they fall down. But there are times where it's just like, oh, if they're just doing a narrative thing where they're like, oh, I want to leap over this table so I can rush at him. It's like, oh, yeah, you could totally just walk around the table and get to that bad guy, but yeah, it's a narrative thing. Yeah, whatever. Or if, unless there's sort of gambling, they want to get advantage or something like that, then we start introducing checks and doing stuff like that. But just jumping on the table, or jumping over it in combat. Pretty simple. Not going to have you. It's like opening a door. Like, you don't need to make a check to open a door in combat, though you could be persuaded in a very specific situation to be like, oh, trying to open this door is difficult. It's something that where failure has consequences if you don't open it. My favorite example for something like that is classic horror movie stuff. So you have the person who's trying to get the keys in the car door to open up the car door and get inside, or get it in the ignition to turn the car on. We know that where they always fumble with the keys because it's dramatic and it's tense. It's a bunch of tension because if they fail, the slasher killer gets them or whatever it is. Right, that's it. There is a clear consequence for not being able to do this. That's why, even though normally we wouldn't have a check to do something like pull keys out of your pocket and put them in a lock and turn it, but because of the very specific situation, this very mundane thing, there is a chance that because of the pressure that's on you, if you fail, something bad would happen. You can't take your time on it, and you can't fail it, or else something bad happens. There is some sort of consequence. But most of the time, there's not. And so jumping a table just to get over it or get on top of it, you're not really trying to get advantage for anything. You're just trying to, do cool stuff because you're playing a cool, fun game of make-believe with some funny rocks with your friends. You just let them do it. And so that's a super mundane one. If it was too fantastical, this would be like, say like leap, and like a large chasm. Like leaping a large chasm is pretty difficult. Or let's say pushing a Fiend into a chasm. Well, the situation, so it's a situation where the thing that you're doing is too difficult or too fantastical that it defies sort of what we think about as being normal expectations, even within the D&D world in which people have magic. But there's no amount of just fighter beefiness that's going to allow you to push the huge pit fiend into the chasm. Now, that's representing the rules of 5e 2024 very easily. Usually it's, you can only push something that's one category size larger than you. So now if you do the wizard drops a spell on you that increases your size, and now you're large, now you can push that huge pit fiend in the chasm, and that's the cool narrative, that's the cool use of the rules to make the cool stuff happen in the game. But by yourself, you're like, yeah, that's too fantastical, you're not going to do that. Or being like, this chasm is like 30 feet wide, you definitely cannot jump that. There's no amount of nat 20s on that athletics check that's going to allow you to jump that far. That is beyond what we think of as the normal expectations of what, even within the D&D world, you should be able to do. Now, of course, we have plenty of jumping rules in D&D, but there are... I think is the best way to talk about them. The jumping rules are very weird. It makes it seem like you can both jump way too far than a person would be able to realistically, and yet not very far as far as the mechanical aspect of the game that's kind of considered to be working in 5-foot blocks of distance. So it's somehow both too mundane and too fantastical at the same time. So it kind of misses both marks and just kind of falls in the middle. That's why usually it's something like this where you have somebody who's trying to jump on a table. That's when I'm like, okay, we're going to make an athletics check just because that just makes more sense. There is a dramatic consequence to failure. It's not like you get to take your time with this. This is something you're doing in the middle of combat, so you can't, do a couple run-ups to it, think about it, take a little stretch, do anything like that. It's like, no, you got to jump now if you're going to do it. Can't think about whether you're going to make it or not. Okay, so that's our roll call example. So, so what should we do instead? So I think the first one is pretty clear. Yeah, you know. No roll necessary. Either happens or it doesn't. And that's generally how you can get around most of this. That is supposed to be the sort of like default, is that there's no roll necessary here. It either happens or it doesn't. We don't need to make a roll for it. Is there any consequence for failure? No. And they can just infinitely retry it? Yeah, you're gonna eventually get it. So yeah, no roll necessary. You just narrate. You go, you guys spend some time looking around this room for the secret door trigger that the party knows is in there. You find it eventually. One of the things that I would do is sometimes I recontextualize those rolls. And that's kind of part 2 here. Recontextualize roll. Roll. From basically pass fail to how skillful. How skillful it's accomplished. Let's put it that way. All right, so let's talk about. Let's finish out no roll necessary. So we had the investigation check for the secret door. No roll necessary. You guys are gonna find it. You have to persuade the NPC to tell them the location of the cult slayer. No roll required. This is very much just a talking scene. The guy's gonna give you the information. And now this is one of the things where we say that, and then, as a dungeon master or game master, we get in a situation where the players are being players, and they've done nothing but like offend this NPC, talk bad about them to their face, and kind of just piss them off or show themselves to be bad people, etc. It becomes very hard as DM or GM to do those mental cartwheels we talked about, to be like, why would this guy give you this information that he knows you need, that you know you need, and you are treating him or her like garbage? So why would they do this? And so you have to think about that and be like, that's when you start spinning things off as Dungeon Master, often. We're like, okay, you need to do this guy a favor, you need to come back, you need to bring him a bribe. You kind of, you do the equivalent of sort of like a rolled up newspaper swat on their nose and be like, no, bad players, bad players. You think about what you've done and come back with a gift to say sorry. But otherwise, no roll necessary. And then jumping on the table, no roll necessary. You just do it. It's just a narrative flair. You do a little back roll across the hood of the car, Dukes of Hazzard style, and you do a little slide and jump to the other side. No problem. This is just a flavor thing. Yeah, you're easily able to do that. Because you falling off the hood of the car, while might be funny if that matches with the scene and sort of the energy that you've already kind of got and the feeling of the scene already. So if it's a cool action scene where they're jumping in and hurrying off after the bad guy, probably not the time to do a goofy pratfall in the game, unless you're looking for a very specific tension break there for a second. Otherwise, you're like, yeah, no, you absolutely just slide across the hood of the car and jump into the driver's seat. And then, recontextualize the roles. This is one of my favorite ones to do. So recontextualizing it for how skillful something's accomplished. So let's look at the investigation check. So you're in the room with the secret door that triggers. They know they're in there. Sometimes you just have the whole group roll for investigation too, and whoever's the highest, that's just the person who finds it. Doesn't matter if they rolled a 4 or a 40. If they're the highest person, they're the one who ends up finding it. So usually that'll be the person who's really good at investigation, the player character that's really good at investigation. But occasionally it's not. Occasionally they roll bad, and the barbarian rolls natural 20 and has a 21. Actually, probably a 19. Knowing most barbarians, that intelligence will be their dump stat, and so that natural 20 will be a 19. But you might be like, and then you get to do a cool thing where they're like, the barbarian's looking around, you're getting frustrated, and you turn around and you lean against the mantle and it shifts and then the doorway opens and you get to do that fun sort of clear adventure thing and be like, oh, the dumb guy found the thing by inadvertently while everybody else was busy looking for it. So you can recontextualize it that way. You can also recontextualize it as like it takes significantly longer than you thought it was going to, or is very much quicker than you thought it would be. If you want to do rolls, if you, let's say we're in this situation where they have to persuade the NPC, the bard rolls extremely high, and they're like, oh yeah, no, absolutely, here you go. Just very sort of much like fast talks in, and the person gives them the information very quickly. Or it could be really slow. It's like, oh yeah, it's like he gives you the information, but he forces you to sit through like an evening of back and forth talk that takes like 2.5 hours to parcel out these measly crumbs of information you need to get the full story. And he kind of forces you to listen to all this like long-winded stuff about subjects you don't care about, topics. For this thing that jumped to my mind is like model trains. It's like this guy's just going to talk to you about model trains for like 2 hours, and you have to talk to him because he's the person who has the information, and he just keeps getting sidetracked because every aspect of the story that he's telling you has some train adjacent thing that's going on in it. And he just spirals off into a tangent to talk about trains. And that would be like a low persuasion check, right? Is that you can't really get him to stay on topic, so you waste time. And time, depending, hopefully, if you're running D&D or other TTRPGs, time is an important aspect of your game. How much time things take, and you think about how plots move by themselves. What happens when player characters need to find the cultists because they're doing a ritual or whatever, and they take like 3 hours to talk to this guy to get the location of the cult slayer. That puts them 3 hours behind. It really kind of like puts the screws on them as far as timers, like time pressure for your adventure. So it's a very useful thing to have timed aspects of your play, of the game you're running, so that way you have that dial that you can kind of tweak it and pull it in as to contextualize what some high rolls or low rolls and be like, oh, you gain a little time because this went really quickly, or you lost more time because this took longer than you thought it would. And that just kind of allows you to sort of like move the tension up and down in the game and control the pacing a little bit. So, how to recontextualize the roll from pass fail to how it's accomplished with jumping a table in combat. Yeah, sometimes it's just, hey, roll an athletics check. You rolled really well. Yeah, you absolutely vault over this thing, or maybe you do like a handstand spring off of it. Very cool martial arts kind of stuff. Or, maybe you roll really low and it's like you make it there, but you kind of like trip and like roll off of it. But you find your feet again and you're back up. So it's just kind of funny it helps pull that into the narrative, even though those, again, when you're doing something like the table, it's so mundane is that you're only using it kind of for a little sparkle of flavor on it, right? You're just throwing some herbs and spice on it. Just kind of making it tasty with that narrative. All right, and what to do instead. The last one that I want to talk about, when you're not rolling or you're recontextualizing it, you're going to fail forward with effort. I don't really do the example rulings. We just talked about that. I just did them all as we were going through them. So, effort. So, effort's a framework that I first encountered through Runehammer Games. Also has a YouTube channel. You can check it out. Also produces their own TTRPGs. Crown Skull's out now. I got this specifically from him and from Index Card RPG. So effort is, and everything in Index Card RPG takes effort. Well, not everything, but lots of things do. It's one of the ways that they do non-combat challenges. And they do that by essentially making everything work within the framework of a combat challenge. So, give you some perspective. What do you do in combat? You pick up your sword, you roll to attack. When you hit with your attack, you then roll damage. Damage is effort. So you just take that same framework of like, I make a check. If I'm successful, I do some damage. I progress towards the end goal, which would be 0 HP for the monsters usually. And you take that same framework and you just apply it to not combat situations. You want to get through this door, this reinforced door. Okay, this reinforced door has an effort of, in index card RPG, would say most things have 1 heart, so 10 hit points. So you're like, oh, well, I'm not really good at unlocking things. Well, somebody would be like, oh, I try to pick the lock on it. It's like, okay, you do a D4. You're successful, you do a D4 plus probably 3 for your lock picking set. So you're probably not going to get it in one go. Unless you roll a crit. That's IC RPG mechanics, though. The idea is that this is something you're gonna like multiple people work on, and it can be multiple people working. It's either one person working on the one thing for multiple rounds, or multiple people working on one thing, either in one round or multiple rounds, however long it takes to get through it. And then again, you have some sort of consequence for failure within that. So one of the things that I do now I don't use quite that same system, just because then you have to give assign hit points to mundane objects, and that doesn't really work. DnD 5e 2024 has pretty bloated hit points, and then you're like, okay, how much damage would player character do if they hit the lockpicking check? It kind of introduces more mechanics than I really want to think about. So I tweaked it, and I do something slightly different. And that's what we're going to talk about now. So I'm going to fail forward with effort. So in this we have the DC and the failed roll total. We're going to multiply that DC, and we're going to apply the roll total as progress towards that. And then we're going to reinforce consequences. It's really nice because what I really liked about this is that effort immediately bakes in a timed aspect to this, which is great. So it really gives us some clear stakes. It's like, okay, so a great example that I like, can we use this example? Yeah. And maybe I'll do 2 examples, but let's do this first one. Okay, so this first one is let's imagine that this is a trapped chamber. They walk into the chamber, door slams shut. There is a vent or a grate at the top of the chamber, and some monster mouths around the sides. As they trigger the trap, they step on it or whatever. The doors bolt shut, and water begins to pour from the monster mouths, and the only way out seems to be a locked grate at the top. There we go. It's clear trap. We have our stakes. If they don't get out of here, they're going to drown. They're going to drown here. Okay, usually that would be like, okay, we need to make, let's say, it's a DC 15 with a lock. And let's say, I could pull some dice out, but we just need a failure. Let's say we rolled a 10. Lockpicking. So, and normally what would happen would be like, oh, well, you failed. You failed, so you don't unlock it. And that would kind of be the end of it. Now, in maybe like a super old school kind of game where you're doing things in like exploration turns and stuff like that, you might be like, oh, this is just a save or die situation. Like, you either are able to get this thing off, open up the grate, whether that's by picking the lock or bend bars kind of aspect for like a fighting man. They're just trying to bend the bars open so they can squeeze through. However they want to get through it. Or, probably they do some shenanigans like rope trick or something like that. Just hoping that that would give them enough air to be able to easily figure out how to get out of there. But that's very old school play. So probably not what your standard 5th edition 2024 characters or players are going to kind of come with that problem with. So they rolled a 10 in lockpicking, so that would be, oh, you failed. And we might have a timer on it and be just like, oh, well, you got 3 rounds to get out of here before you guys, or maybe at this point you're just like, oh, the room fills with water, and now every round while you guys are working on it, you have to make a Constitution saving throw to see if you take a breath. Or there's the drowning rules, but the drowning rules I don't really like in 5e2024, so maybe don't use them that often, because it's weird that the unconscious body can just be like, or your conscious body can just be chill for minutes in strenuous activity underwater. It's like, yes, there are people that could do that, but there's also like, that's their life. Like skin divers are like that, where they can do on one breath, they can do a massive amount of athleticism on one breath. But that's probably not your standard adventurer, who's probably not really trained to do something like that. This is where, when you start getting real world stuff mixed up in D&D stuff, where stuff just like, it's kind of really hard to make it make sense sometimes. Alright, so that's it. So if we were using our failed effort, I'd be like, okay, you failed this check. So you immediately did not get it open this round. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this DC. I'll think about how many rounds I want them to be in here. Let's say I don't want this to be, this is kind of a minor thing, so I'm going to say it's going to be, we're going to multiply by 2. And usually I do 2 or 3 is a pretty good one there. Sometimes I do 5 if I want it to be like a longer, kind of a chunkier thing. Like sometimes if I want it to be like a long race or chase or something like that, we'll have some effort tied to it that way, so there's multiple rounds for people to be able to do all sorts of cool stuff. And I want to make sure there's plenty of rounds before the chase kind of comes to an end. We're going to multiply it by 2. For effort 30. Okay, so DC just basically did it twice. So this is a nice thing. What I like about this fail forward check, it means that that check that you just did, and this is what I think is the most important difference here, is the check you just did, that isn't just nothing then. That's not a total write-off. That 10 result is applied to the effort total. Now, essentially what you're sitting at is you have 10 of 30 progress. And so I just make little notes, go, okay, they're trying to hit a total of 30. They're at 10 right now. And so rather than make it a check and then they do some sort of effort damage, I'm like, okay, well, let's just progress the check out, the DC's out. Now it's just, instead of having like, you have to succeed on 2 or 3 things, 2 or 3 checks to get through this, you'd be like, oh, you can get through it, but we don't know how long it's going to take you to get through it, how much time, how competent you'll be at it. But there's no, you're always making progress every time you roll. Even with a natural 1, you're still making progress. You're still making that 1 point of progress. You may be really stymied at that, but you are still technically making progress. So that way it doesn't ever feel like, oh, even when I roll really low, it doesn't mean I can't pass the challenge. It just means the challenge is going to take you a long time, and you might have to deal with a lot of consequences because of that, because of the bad rolls. But you will inevitably get through it if you just keep going after it. And that solves a lot of those sort of soft lock problems. If we have that one locked door that keeps, that bottlenecks the entire rest of the adventure behind it, and you're like, they have to get through the door. What happens when they fail the lockpicking check? It goes into effort. Yes, you do that. And then we have to create the consequence or chance of consequence. This one for me. So in this example that we were talking about, obviously the water rises. And we could do very similar. If we didn't want to do water, we could do the classic, the crushing walls gag. We could do that. That gives something for the other party members to do, where they're like pushing back against the walls, and that will that counts as progress as well, because they're buying time for character to unlock the door. So it's very loosey-goosey. You can set up a lot of people to work on it at the same time. Now, if you're going to have a lot of people work on it, obviously you're going to want a higher effort, unless you are okay with it being just done in one round. It's also very useful because players still have the help action, or they can just give help to somebody. It's like if the person's trying to unlock the door, and another person proficient with lockpicking tools comes up there and somebody throws a guidance on them, and the other one gives them the help action, and you guys are able to, because through some teamwork, you're able to get through this very, very quickly. And it kind of represents that. I like that. That's why I like this framework. So we have the consequences. You know, the water rises, the trap, the effect happens essentially, or you make a wandering monster. Usually it's just a roll. That's how I do it. So I guess I should talk a little bit about the design usage for wandering monsters. Like I said, I have the whole video if you want to go the deep dive, but down to the smallest, distilled to the smallest droplet that we can, wandering monsters are a way to help you apply pressure within a dungeon or adventure. The longer the player characters hang around, the more likely it is they're going to get into fights, and fights whittle at their resources, and most importantly, these are generally easy fights, simple, trivial fights, but they whittle away at the player characters' resources, and they don't get anything out of it. They're not going to get any sort of particularly good loot out of it. They're not going to get like XP out of it. The whole point is that it's punitive, but punitive in a way that it's like death by 1,000 cuts. It's like if you guys spend time to search every inch of this dungeon, you will get into, 2, 3, 4, 10 more fights than you otherwise would have combat encounters. That's not much when there's small combat encounters, maybe a handful of kobolds that aren't a big challenge, but they're still going to do damage to you, most likely. And that, over time, will make the dungeon more deadly. The idea being that the longer you stay in the unsafe dungeon or adventure space, the more dangerous it becomes for you, for your player characters. It's a place that you want to get into quickly and get out of quickly. You don't want to waste a lot of time in there. It's very dangerous. That helps you get around things like we talked about with the investigation room, where it's like, oh, they've killed everybody in the dungeon. They know that the thing's in here. It's just a matter of rolling until they get it. But if you wanted to add some tension to it, be like, no, people are definitely moving through here with your wandering monsters. Like, there's always people coming and going. They're gonna find the bodies. They're gonna start running around and raising an alarm and stuff. So the longer you guys spend in here looking for things, then you're not capable of finding the thing, the more dire the situation becomes. So then you see that tension start to incline again and start to build. And that's what we're looking for when we kind of run the game. So yeah, that's how I use the wandering monster roll, because you don't actually have to throw the monsters at them themselves. Just sometimes the threat of the monsters will be enough to kind of immediately bump up the tension and have people start going and rolling and making maybe some weird decisions, maybe some decisions they otherwise wouldn't make. Is that maybe you get the player characters, they start to panic a little bit. They maybe do something that's loud, something that draws attention, something that is not stealthy, or in some other way is suboptimal, or they use a big spell to just get through something real quick. It's a thing where we need to find the secret. We need to find the trigger to open the secret door, and it's taking time. And we hear that there are a bunch of drows yelling in Elvish, that it's echoing down the hallway. There's definitely people here. They've definitely found bodies. It's only a matter of time before they find us. We're gonna have to be in another combat. We gotta find this thing. One round goes by. We can't find this thing. You hear the shouting's getting closer. It's getting louder. Another round. Can't find the thing. You start to hear heavy bootsteps hustling in your direction. At that point, the wizard's like, screw it. I cast knock on the door and we just go. Cool. Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to waste a higher level spell just to get through the door. That way we can get through the door, because we don't have time. We don't want to get into another combat in which I'll have to use at least one spell in that combat. So I might as well use the one spell now and just get through the door. Perfect. But it shows the example of like, oh, there's very easy rising tension, and wandering monsters really help with that. And that the threat of the wandering monsters alone is oftentimes better than actually sitting through the actual combat. Because the combat itself is often like a fail state of the exploration stage. In general, depending on what you're trying to do in the dungeon. Sometimes your goal for the dungeon is kill everything in the dungeon. you got yourself a little goblin infestation. You got to take the local town wants it taken care of. So then in that case, you do want to kill everything that's in there. But usually, most dungeon crawls, you're looking for loot or looking for a very specific item, or you're trying to reclaim hostages or whatever it is. And in those cases, like, generally the fail state is getting into combat. Generally, you don't want to get into combat in those situations. You want the things. You don't necessarily want the combat. But that depends on your game and the dungeon specifics. But yeah, that is essentially how this works. So that was it. We could do some progress here. Talk about it. So we definitely did it for our investigation check. Persuasion check works very much the same. You make a persuasion check, it fails. We spin up the NPC a little bit, and this is the cool thing is that whenever I'll transfer something like, oh, you failed at this, I'm going to do a fail forward and push it into effort. You failed we'll just use 15 because it's a good number. The DC 15 persuasion check, so we're going to actually bump that up. We're going to make it, you think this is going to take some time, so we're going to make it effort 60. But the thing is like everybody has to talk. The whole group is talking to this NPC and trying to get them to give you the very specific information. Sometimes they can use the help action, but other times they're going to have to also make persuasion rolls or intimidation rolls if they want to go down that path, and that may or may not have consequences. And in that idea, I might give them something like resistance to it. Try to use that resistance mechanic and be like, okay, normally you did an intimidation check and you got a 20, dirty, not natural, just a 20 total. Be like, this guy seems really, really resistant to being intimidated because he's like the captain of the guard or something like that. So instead of doing 20 points of effort, you're going to do 10 points of effort. And we'll change it that way. But the idea is that I can get everybody involved around the table in a scene that sometimes usually only the face character takes care of. Sometimes it's just the sorcerer who talks to people. And sometimes you want everybody to be like, you're a group, everybody wouldn't naturally, like a true group of people wouldn't naturally be talking to this person. It wouldn't just be one guy from our party talks to you and then has like 3 people behind them just like with their arms crossed, just like staring at you like, listen to that guy, don't talk to me, don't perceive me. And not doing that and being like, no, everybody talks to him naturally. The nice thing with the effort is because even if you roll really low, like we talked about, you still make progress. So even if you have the dwarf ranger who's, I'm thinking of my own character, who has absolutely 0 social skills and 0 sort of like persuasion, intimidate. He's got a charisma of 10. He's just a dude in that regard. He still, even when he rolls at 5, that's still 5 more than where they were at with the progress. So you still make some progress to it. And sometimes that can be enough. Sometimes there doesn't really have to be big consequences for using effort in something like a social scene. Again, it just can be the amount of time it takes. So you guys had other stuff you wanted to do in town, but you guys aren't able to do anything today because you have to spend basically the whole evening drinking with this guard captain to get him liquored up enough to tell you this information that you need. And there you go. So the consequence for that is that you guys lost some time. So you're not able to do as much prep. You're not able to go to the market. So then you're like, do we leave in the morning or do we wait? Do we leave in the morning at first, like to go deal with this problem of the cults, or do we want to wait until the market opens so we can get some supplies before we leave? And then you as a Dungeon Master are like, okay, we found a choice. So you can either choose to go quickly and be potentially unprepared, or get there later, but be more prepared for it. And then that's when we do our cartwheels. We go, okay, what would be the consequence of each of those actions? What would be the benefiting consequence? Getting there quickly, okay, maybe the guys, at least on the outside, are unprepared for them. Maybe the guards on the outside is asleep because you got there early in the morning. And he's asleep at his post because he's like his last watch. And so he fell asleep. That could be one. If they spend some time going later, maybe everybody's alert up and around. So that's kind of a detriment, but not unexpected. So maybe our detriment would be something like, or maybe there's a patrol that they can potentially run across on the way there. So there's a potential they might get into an encounter that way. They might be seen or alerted, the dungeon alerted before they get there, but they'll be more prepared. So let's say, whatever supplies they picked up, who knows what it could be, food or water, something like that. If they have to travel to get to this location, if they left early, that might mean that they have to rely on some forage checks, some survival checks to make sure that they have enough food and water to get there, because they weren't able to resupply, or they chose not to resupply. And so they go fast, but the consequence could be that you end up. I probably wouldn't slow them down, because that's the whole point of going fast. So they would get there quickly. The consequence would be maybe you didn't do the survival quite well enough, and or at least now all of you are poisoned. You have basically eaten some bad food, taken some drinks of stagnant water. Like, you've got a lot of gut stuff going on. So you guys have you're vomiting, or worse, you need some Pepto-Bismol because you're having issues, but you get there quickly. So that means things are further on. Things aren't as far along, and it's easier for you to get in. So yeah, you just you play with it. You make a choice. Try to make the choices interesting, and have it be, oh, there will be some sort of clear consequence for this and clear benefit to doing this thing. But yeah, I think that's everything that I wanted to talk about rolling, holding, and falling forward. Let me see, and I wrote down some notes earlier that I haven't been doing a very good job of looking off of. I want to make sure that I have everything. Is there anything? Yeah, I think I got everything. Did I get everything? It would appear that I've gotten everything. Go me. I remember things because I wrote them down, maybe. Who knows if that's why. But I was able to remember it. So good on me. So yeah, that's what rolling and contextualizing and failing forward and trying to make understanding when to roll. That's the easier thing to do. Hard to master, easy to learn, hard to master. So again, we want to watch out for that no consequence for failure, which essentially ends in infinite retries. You don't want failure results in a bottleneck or a dead end, something that locks you out of the rest of the adventure if you fail something. You don't want to roll for those situations, and there doesn't need to be any attempt that's too easy or mundane or too difficult or fantastical to achieve. Something that doesn't fit within our normal sort of DC range when we think about that. When we're like, oh, can I make a acrobatics check to take half damage from falling 500 feet out of the sky? No, you can't. There's no amount of acrobatics that's going to allow you to do that. It is even an instance where I'm something like the slow fall of the monk is like, no, that's not going to apply here. You're falling out of the sky. There's nothing around for you to slow fall against. You're going to die because it's 500 feet up in the air. Which is a weird example to use, but here we are. So yeah, I think that's everything I want to talk about when to roll, hold, and fail forward. Hopefully that's useful for you. I really like effort, this little tweak that I've taken from Index Card RPG and twisted around a little bit, and I think that you will find it useful too, to recontextualize those things and have that thing that it's really hard to figure out sometimes a framework, like a mechanical framework for non-combat stuff, specifically in D&D. 4th edition introduced things like the skill challenges, which are a cool idea, but it's definitely one of those things where sometimes they read a lot better on paper than they actually feel naturally to play. And so I liked those ideas, and I liked the sort of general effort thing from Index Card RPG. So I kind of made this fork and kind of like smushed them together to kind of make the best thing I want to do. It's like, I set up a thing that a goal you're trying to achieve. Sometimes there'll be a round limit, sometimes there won't, depending on, if that makes sense or not for the situation. But it's very very loose. You just take the DC, I multiply it a few times, depending on how long I kind of want the challenge to be. And then it encourages, the thing is that it's so broad, is that it encourages people to deal with it however they want to deal with it as far as a player is. Like, okay, you have the door that's locked, the thief is going to try to unlock it, but there's no reason that the barbarian's not trying to break it down with an axe, or maybe your artificer's trying to get their crowbar and is like prying the hinges off the door or something like that. So they can all of them can work towards a shared target, and then it's just whoever breaks that effort total, makes it to the finish line essentially. Theirs is the thing that ends up being the thing that busts open the door. So maybe that's the artificer who, puts their foot against the wall, gets the crowbar in there, and peels the hinge off the door, and they're able to just push the door in very quickly. It makes much noise, but they're able to do it. Sometimes they unlock the door, sometimes the barbarian breaks it down. Doesn't matter, they're all trying to get through the door, so... And each way of getting through it is valid. And they can do it all at the same time. Which might be kind of funny if you think about 3 people trying to squeeze into one doorway to work at the door while somebody's trying to do like a fine motor thing while one of them's trying to rip the hinges off and the other one's just trying to like burst an axe through it. But mechanically it works, and that's the point that I care about. I think mostly is having a very clear mechanic to put in front of my players that they feel like they're making progress on something. And then having a framework that I can insert into those exploration components, that I can insert into social situations to feel like there's actually some mechanics to those areas of the games, which especially in 5e in 2024, but really all of D&D, sometimes there's not a ton of meat for how to play the game in those 2 pillars. It is, at the end of the day, a combat game. It is a game about combat. All you got to do is look at how many rules are in the section in each of the books dealing with fights, and how many of the sections, what the page count is for sections that are dealing with exploration, and the page count that's dealing specifically with social stuff. You see that, and you recognize that, oh yeah, combat's like 2/3 of this game, if not more. So you don't oftentimes get a lot of good, clear mechanics for the other stuff. So sometimes, like this, you gotta make them up. So try it out. And see if it works for you. Let me know. Let me know in the comments if it works out for you, or if you've done something like this, or if you've done something that's similar, or maybe come at it from a different way that's not the old skill challenge or this sort of effort roll. If you have some other way that you deal with calling for rolls and failing forward and doing that aspect. I'm always interested in new and different ways to kind of do this Dungeon Master thing. So let me know. Alright, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a short break and I'm going to get some more coffee. We're going to do that, we're going to come back, and next we're going to talk about gassing up poison. So we're going to talk a little bit about poison, just to spoil what we're going to talk about. Oh, you guys can't see that. There we go, gassing up poison. We'll just go ahead up there. So we're going to talk about gassing up poison. For that, we're going to make it... how to make it more useful for PCs. Now, for those of you who aren't familiar with the super nerd corners of D&D, where we look at things that like what resistances are most common versus rare. With poison, that is the most common resistance and or immunity to any type of damage in the game. Damage and condition. Tons of stuff are resistant to poison. Lots of stuff is immune to poison. Which generally includes every venomous and poisonous creature in the game. So when you're a PC and you have things like the poison kit, or you want to have that rogue fantasy or that archer fantasy where you're like, oh, I dip my weapons at different like unguents and oils and things like that to give effects and like do extra damage and stuff like that. The D&D just doesn't really off the page do a lot to kind of help you get there. By making it weirdly expensive in D&D And most importantly is that it's just not useful. There's way too many monsters that are resistant, if not just flat out immune to poison. Entire swaths of monsters are immune. Constructs, undead, both large categories of monsters, both utterly immune to poison. So we're going to talk a little bit about like how do we bridge that gap? How do we make poison something worthwhile as taking as a player character, as something that will be useful, something they're going to want to pursue either by buying poisons or collecting monster parts to make their own poisons, extracting venom and things like that. So we're going to talk about that. But first, I'm going to fill up my coffee. So I'm going to be right back. So hold tight. Be back in just a minute. All right, back. I remember that there were a couple things that I did want to share about, just random stuff before we move on to the poison and gassing it up, getting it a little bit more useful than it is. But I did want to talk about a couple things that kind of got going on, just because it's fun. Nope, I finally got through So You Want to Be a Game Master. Meaty tome, 500 and some odd pages. By Justin Alexander from the Alexandrian blog. If you've been around the TTRPG space for a while, you're probably very familiar with the Alexandrian. But anyways, Justin Alexander also has his own YouTube channel. Go check it out. This is a game mastery advice kind of book. Took me a surprisingly long time to read. Not because necessarily the length of it, because it's actually a very, very easy to read book. Really very easy to read. And there's also like charts and things are broken up well, and yeah, it's well written from that aspect. It's very, very readable. We'll put it that way. It's very readable. But it took me a long time because I felt like I'd make a little bit into it, and then I'd read something that would make me go, huh. Or be like, I'm not sure I agree with that. Or, oh, maybe, but, and lots of like, why that? So it was very interesting read, and I do want to talk about it on stream on the channel at some point. I need to make some notes about it. Again, it's a meaty guy. I want to kind of talk about sort of the stuff I really liked in it, the stuff I didn't as much like in it, and some of the stuff that kind of, and there's probably the larger section that kind of is going to kind of make me go, what? But why? So we'll talk a little bit about that, and it's going to be interesting, but it's going to take me a little while to digest. The only thing that I'll say sort of off the bat is that one thing that after reading this book, actually not even reading just a little bit into this book, probably within the first 50 pages, probably. Yeah. Most of this is about building dungeons, by the way. A good chunk of this book is about building dungeons. It's like the forefront of most things, and then talks about some other adventure styles. But it is a thing that I kind of you get about 50 pages into, or at least I did. Get about 50 pages into it, and then I go, I'm not sure I know who this book is for. I'm not sure who the target reader is for the book. And that confuses me more about what's written in the book, because I don't really understand the intended audience. Because I read it and I felt like, oh, well, I don't think this intended audience is me. But I also don't think it's necessarily new Dungeon Masters and Game Masters, which, when you have a title of a book that's So You Want to Be a Game Master, and then you're going to write something for new DMs, and then you're going to write this lengthy tome, which is, if is longer than, I think, any Dungeon Master's guide or Game Mastery guide for any system that I know of. Denser book. And that would be I would feel like such a deterrent for younger or newer Dungeon Masters, I should say, not younger, newer Dungeon Masters. They're like, oh, you need to read this 500-page book on top of what, like, the Dungeon Master's Guide or whatever for the system you're running to feel like you're competent at this. It's like, nope, don't need to do that. But at the same time, some of that stuff as a more advanced Dungeon Master and Game Master, I'm like, this is either stuff that I know already. I feel like you learn pretty early on in running games, or is so outside of what I would consider my own personal Dungeon Master, Game Master style, that it's hard to find things that would be useful to me here. Because once off sort of a flawed premise. And now I'm starting to talk too much about the book. That's what the video is going to be for. I need to sit down and kind of put my thoughts on paper and kind of think about it for a minute, how I want to approach it, and what the real specific things I want to dial in on. But another thing I did is that I've also started playing around with some ChatGPT. I know everybody's feelings about it are very different about the energy it takes to use it, things of that nature. I understand. I am empathetic. I don't think it should be something that should be attached to every Google search. But I do think there are cool things that we can do with it, and I do want to share one of the cool things that I have, and that I've done over sort of like this past week. Mainly because there would be no other way for me to do something like this, which is give myself a little bit of art. Make this a little. Can we bring it down? Oh. Hey, let me see. What do we want to do? I'm going to get it in the center here. There we go. Now can we get it? Well, not quite. The way it's set up, it just does not like this guy very much. Here we go. That's going to be as good as we can get. So, anyways, I started making these tarot card inspired images for one of the pantheons that's in my world in the game, the campaign I'm running right now. I said one because there's more than one pantheon of gods. It's complicated. I do complicated world building. It's not for everybody. You don't need to do it. It's for me, and I'm sick. Don't be like me. Just use the gods in the DMG and D&D. You don't need to make up your own pantheon, much less multiple pantheons for your game. Don't do it. It's a waste of time. For the most part. I do it because I find it fun. And religion plays such a larger part of this world and the campaigns I run in it than probably any other D&D game I've ever been in or around, or even really heard tell of. And I have a player who's playing a character who is a cleric and is leaning in on the god stuff, so I wanted to do that. So it's very much like a Greek pantheon kind of style approach. So it's not, clerics are not dedicated and priests are not dedicated to one specific deity and don't worship any others. It's like, no, you go to the right deity for the right thing you're trying to get to. But yeah, you're gonna have priests of Ceres, as we see here. As we Ceres. It almost worked. Didn't quite work. But we have the priests of that, but they also worship other gods. They don't just worship this one god. They're just priests of this temple or cathedral or whatever it is. Shrine. So this is Ceres. So there are seven deities in this pantheon. You have Ceres here. Had to go back and to change them. They're still a little close to Hermes, which is understanding when you say, flying god. ChatGPT is going to pull a lot of Hermes imagery. And it's not wrong. It does have distinctly Hermes feel to Ceres. But generally in charge of safe ship travel, weather, things like that. And that's why we have the background. So each of the cards kind of ties you in. The illustration ties you into sort of what this god's about. Their kind of main vibe. That's Ceres. The next one is the cat. No, it's just keep. Okay, that's fine. Make sure you guys can see the card. There we go. So yeah, this is the cat. The cat is a deity that's about sort of the untamed wilderness, the dangers of the night. Beware, here there be dragons, kind of stuff. So if you want to go overland traveling, this is the sort of deity that you might pray to for safe travels. If you're traveling overland, that you're not going to have any sort of encounters with monsters or the struggles of the wilderness, things of that nature. Nature in and of itself in a lot of ways. Then you would do things to the cat. So in the cat we see the trail there that they're standing on. Next to them is a border stone, so it kind of tells you, oh, this is the end of civilization. You got the wilderness behind them, the cat that obviously is a sort of predatory, panther-like kind of style with its unnatural eyes. The eyes are a big theme. Cat, sort of when we think about the iconic, you look into the jungle and you have the red eyes that stare back at you from the darkness. Very on brand for the cat. The cat's very much like that. And then the night, the dangers that lurk in the dark. So yeah, the cat comes up a lot with adventurers because adventurers fight a lot of monsters, and travel to a lot of places over land, and go outside the bounds of civilization. So the cat is very potent for adventurers in the world. Again, I know this is just really me showing off my campaign. I know it's mine. I get to make something cool. Just deal with it. All right, let me have this. Let me have. So next up we have the Hierophant. There we go. Another important distinction is that in this world there's no like god of evil, even though that will immediately come up, and it does every time that I play with new players in the world and they come across the Hierophant. It was like, oh, you come across this temple, and inside there is definitely like a giant statue of this lich-looking guy. And they're like, oh, well, this is clearly evil. I was like, nah, not evil. Can be used for evil. Can do evil things. Not necessarily evil. The deities in this world are a little bit more law and chaos focused, and a little less good and evil focused. So the Hierophant's in charge of Arcana. They're in charge of magic, obviously. They're in charge of the undeath side of death. They are... part of their domains include contracts and competitions and games and things of that nature, dicing with death kind of things. So you see it kind of like all kind of pull in and synergize into this one thing. And the forbidden knowledge aspect, things of that nature, all that stuff gets pulled in. So it is a pretty heavy knowledge domain kind of character, but also deals with that undeath. And also deals with the competitions too. So in the festival that we're running in the earlier, I said that, hey, you go to the temple, and the temple's not for this god, but there is a shrine that they have set up, and tons of people are at this little shrine making their offerings of like dried and dead flowers and incense and things of that nature to the Hierophant, or to get themselves a blessing for the competitions, for the challenges of the upcoming day, that they want the blessings to be there to do their best, basically, in the competition. But it looks very sort of like... It does look incredibly evil from the outside. Is that anytime you see people like walk up to this shrine that's got like a bunch of like melted candles and skulls and things like that, and they're like, oh, that's, iconic, like, that's evil stuff. And then you see people who are like happy and like laughing around it and stuff. It's usually one of those sort of head swivel, double take kind of situations for players the first time they come across it in the world. But then they get over it once they learn a little bit about the deity. They're like, oh, okay, that's the Hierophant. So the Maker is pretty standard. It's the closest, I think, to probably kind of a normal D&D kind of deity. Very sort of like Moradin. Kind of falls in somewhere in between kind of Moradin and Arathis. Arathis is Law and Order. Yeah, so the Maker is very much a deity that is about creation, civilization, law and order. That aspect. They are very humanoid-centric deity, as the other stuff's been more like nature and weird paranormal stuff and what happens beyond death and the weather. And this one is like for what we would consider like human endeavor sort of situation. What we would classify as maybe that is this character. And this deity focuses on that stuff. So the Maker is somebody you pray to, obviously, if you're an artisan, probably your favorite one. Merchant guild. And, I mean, merchant guild might be in the Hierophant. It kind of depends on where you are. It could also be for some other things too. They could pray to other people for different things. But the maker is, yeah, industry. If you were having to go to court and you wanted something, you know, obviously the legal proceedings to go your way, you might. Sorry, I'm all boogered up. That's all right. I'll mess with that later. Sorry, I get distracted. Going to legal proceedings, you might pray to the maker for you to be, you know, things to go your way. So very much law and order, creation of things. Also home and hearth god. And the maker is not always depicted as male, just happens to be depicted as male in this instance. There are a lot of these, and I have to sort of explain that a little bit sometimes to players, is that a lot of these interpretations of the deities are very specific socially and culturally. So depending on it, like depending on where you're at in the world, the maker is going to look like a dwarf. It's not going to be a human. Here it's a human, you know, pretty white-skinned human. That's unfortunately that's a chat GPT, just kind of like defaulted like white people. So that's what it does. But yeah, if you come across it and close to the tropics, maker's not going to look like that. Each of the gods is sort of like representative of the people who create those images. So yeah, that's the maker. He has the Naiad. So it is funny, Cirrus is the only one who kind of has a just name, even though I could call them the Cirrus. It's just, I don't know, something about that name just always wants me to go, oh, Cirrus. But every other god is the something, and they don't have, it's not like Athena or Ares or something like that, or Zeus. They don't have just like a dude's name. They're more, I want them to be a little bit more intangible than that. Like really not prescribing this idea that maybe the people are made in the image of the god or gods. Kind of playing with that instead. So the Naiad, that is the festival that my players are at right now. It's a Naiad festival. Naiad is primarily in charge of love. So it deals mostly with love, mostly protection against heartbreak and new love. This is very Easter-centered festival, very new spring growth. Right, we have the rabbit iconography and motifs that kind of go with that, which, you know, the bounty of life, new flowers, budding flowers. So it's a festival about doing the dirty. And my players are dealing with it, and so lots of people are dressed up in the same sort of like sheer clothing and willowy things and running around, and the whole competition that's going on in the festival is challenges are there to prove who is the most eligible bachelors and bachelorettes based off of sort of like their abilities scores, essentially. Like how did they do in these different ability challenges? And these people are what we would consider, you know, high grade potential partners. You know, they're smart, they're witty, they're charismatic, they're in shape, they're looking for somebody, those people who did really well at a lot of different varied challenges. They're very well-rounded people. The Naiad's in charge of that, as well as seafood, so there's a lot of seafood that's at this too, so you've got a lot of aphrodisiac seafood like oysters and things like that that kind of come up in this festival. So she's in charge of that as well. And you probably saw the sword in her hand and was like, well, that's kind of weird for a god of love to have a sword in their hand. Also in charge of a sort of protection of those, specifically at sea. So for safe journeys. So we had the cat who you pray to for like safe journeys when you're going overland, going into the wilderness, but you might pray to the Naiad to keep you safe. But you also want to pray to Cirrus too for good weather and good, you know, no storms, things like that might hurt you as well. And it's also, part of hers is specifically war at sea. That she's partially in charge of that. So, again, very eclectic kind of gods that kind of do very interesting things. Now, if you want to see how I built this whole pantheon, that's over on the blog. I did this many years ago, and so you can go read it. You can see it. I used tables. These were all basically generated for me, and then I tweaked the generation and off of some random rolls, and that's the divine pantheon I ended up with, and it's kind of just cohesed into this. So you can go read that. That's redragonfiend.com. You can go find it. There's a whole subsection, go to the world building from scratch series, and you can go find the pantheons. There's like 3 different posts about it. And this is Pantheon 1. There's a second pantheon in there as well. Because that's right, not everybody worships the same pantheon. There is no one true gods in this sort of campaign setting. It's very, very messy. That's the whole point, is that it's like real life, it's just really messy like that. And our last deity for this pantheon is the Night Swan. A fan favorite, and one of my favorites too. I do love the idea that one of these gods is just a big old swan. So the Night Swan is very interesting caricature. The Night Swan is in charge of bounty of harvest, as you see down there in the foreground, as well as you see some mushrooms and the night. They are the primary god of the night and the sky, because they're swan and they fly. But also nighttime, but also in a peaceful nighttime. Oh, actually, there's one more god. Wait, we're on god number 6. There's one more god. One of the primary gods of the sky, because the other one's going to be the other primary god of the sky. So we have like 3 sky gods, which makes sense. We have like 3 water gods too. 2 or 3. Nope, 3. So it just kind of depends. So, but in the front you see that the bounty of the harvest, but also the fungus in there, which the mushrooms, that because they also are primarily the god about entropy and decay as well. Well, not entropy, decay, or decomposition, is sort of like taking something that has died and like recycling. It's the circle of life kind of stuff. All that falls within Night Swans. So again, a big nature deity along with the cat, but also the primary god for agriculture and bounty of the land and the sea. Well, not the sea, that's the Naiad. Bounty of the land. At least as far as flora is concerned. So, because for fauna, that'll probably end up under the cat for the most part. And if you're talking about sea life, well, that's going to end up under the Naiad. So, hopefully it's not sounding like this is incredibly, incredibly in-depth. It's not really. It's pretty simple. I have a little primer that just goes over them. Gods, I got like a little stat block. It's like, here's what they do, here's what they're in charge of, here's kind of the stuff that's iconography around them. But yeah, this is Night Swan, one of my favorites. It's a fun deity to have, the one that's like about decay, but also the aspect of it, like decay also being like fertilizer and like enriching the soil, which helps the bounty of the land and the circle of life kind of aspect of it. But also the primary sort of like agricultural deity. And it's cool to not have that be like a humanoid kind of creature, or your standard like fertile mother kind of Earth Gaia kind of goddess. It's something just a little bit different. And then our last one that we're going to talk about is the Void. You got to have another spooky guy in here. So we've got the Hierophant, who's a little spooky, and then we've got the Void, who's our other spooky. The Void is the deity of entropy. This is the end of all things. The black, deep black hearts of the ocean, the empty vastness of the sky, everything in between, the overall god of darkness and entropy. But also, because of the way we set this up, is that not technically evil. Like, there's plenty of people who recognize that aspect of life and understand that there's the end. One of the primary god that's in charge of like death rites and rituals and burials and things like that is the Void, is the ending of that. And then there's some crossover with the Night Swan when it comes to what do you do with the body afterwards. Like, are they buried in the ground? Do they get a mushroom suit? Are they turned into, they cremated and turned into ash and given back to the earth? Or different places have different sort of death rites. And so depending on what it is, also depends on where you go. The Void also represents sort of like deep holes into the earth too. So again, another one that you a lot of adventurers are keen on, because they often need to go into the deep bowels of the earth and are underdark sort of areas and things like that. Well, then the void keep you, and the void keep you safe. May you be able to stare into the void and walk into its presence and return. And yeah, so that's the void. Very cool iconography. Some of these are obviously more favorite than others. The void, I think, card turned out really, really well. I also really love the Night Swans one. Some of these need, most of the others still need a little bit of work. So Sears needs a little bit of work. The cat doesn't quite look panthery enough to me. It looks like somewhere in between a panther and a house cat. I want them to be a little bit more ferocious in that regard. A Hierophant, I like this one. I wish the background was a little bit different. I wanted more of like an endless cistern, underground cistern, or hall of some type. It kind of showed them in the vastness down there. So I think this is a little bit too cloistered. The Maker, I feel like, is really probably the most basic one. It's like, it's fine, but it's not. Like, when we look at something like this where we have like a lot of visuals, like there's really important stuff to kind of pull out of this. The Maker is just kind of like surrounded by workbench stuff, which is all important Maker stuff. And you've got the hearth behind them on one side, and you've got a loom on the other side, and they're, you've got your anvil and their potter's wheel. So you've got all that stuff, but it's just not super interesting to look at. I feel like it does the job. It just doesn't give us. It also doesn't represent a lot of the law aspect or order aspect. We've got our little column topper over here, but we could mess that up. And then the Naiads one is the one where the colors are just a little bit different. Like, I just feel like they're just not contrasty enough. Maybe that's just a me thing, though. Yeah, had to give them, because originally all their clothing was the same color as the water, so it made it look like the water turned into his clothing, which was a cool idea, and I liked that when it first came out. But the more I looked at it, I was like, I felt like it gave this more of an idea that like the Naiad was the water. And I was like, that's not quite, I think, the normal interpretation of that deity. So I don't want that. So I had them go back in and change this to have this softer, more sort of purple. We play on the sort of like the squid ink dye and stuff like that. Things, or what is it? Anemone? There's something that gives you purple ink from the sea. I can't remember what it is. I can't remember if it's squid or maybe it's sea anemone. I don't remember. But yeah, those are gods, and yeah, it was a cool thing I did this week, so I wanted to share it, even though, I try not to do too much ChatGPT stuff, because I know it's sort of bad for the environment, and I don't want to reinforce that AI should be in everything. I'll say that. But it does allow me to do something I would otherwise not be able to do, which is cool. Alright, so gassing up poison. Let's talk about gassing up poison. How do we make it more useful for PCs? That's a big thing. Because almost everything's immune to it. We have too many, we'll say monsters at this point. Monsters that are resistant immune to poison. We talked about that already. We talked about that any creature that basically has venom or poison as part of their stat block, as damage or condition they deal, are immediately immune to it. So that's basically all arachnids. Actually, a ton of the like normal beast monsters, snakes, bugs, those things. Undead, typically immune to poison. Constructs immune to poison. Lots of things like devils are, certainly specific devils are immune to poison. So you get to a position where it's just like so much stuff is just straight out immune to poison, and then on top of that, there are even more that are just resistant to it, like dwarves and Dwergar. are two very common ones. But I think some of the drow are for very specific reasons. They also use a bunch of poison. Drow is one of the creatures that makes a lot of poison. That's kind of their shtick. Has been for a long time. It's drow poison. So how can we make poison? Because remember that D&D has the Poisoner's Kit. They have the Poisoner's Kit. And it is just a cool narrative, cool thing to do, to be like, I want to be the rogue who applies the oil or the unguent to our weapons. That way we do extra damage or do conditions, or being able to like sneak into somebody's room and give them poison while they're sleeping, do the like cool ninja thread thing, or get it cooked into the food or whatever it is. Just this opportunity to do those things. But D&D doesn't really facilitate that fantasy very well. So how can we help? How can we help? I think the first thing, make it cheaper and more available. So if I'm correct, which I'm probably not, let's say what's the cost for D&D poisons? Basic poison costs 100 gold. Here's the price per dose for poisons. So basic poison that just gives you the poison condition starts at 100 gold. 150, 500, 200, 200, 300, 250, 1500, 400, 250, 2000 for the purple worm, 200, 600, 150, 1200. And a lot of these aren't even things you can put on your weapon. Like, actually, most of them aren't. Most of them are ingested. So you have to go out of your way. You have to put it in somebody's drink or food. They take it. Or find it, like I said, do the ninja thread thing where you kind of drip it into their mouth while they're asleep or something. But only very few of these are injury, which is thing that you like coat weapons in. And that's how they get it. Or technically you can do that with contact with crawler mucus too. I guess you could put it on the blade, and then that would be contact as well. So first, we got to make it cheaper. Those things are way too expensive. For how many creatures are just straight up immune or resistant to poison already? We got to make that cheaper. They're also hard to find, which makes sense. I mean, when you think about it, it would be a little weird to have a shop in town that's like, oh, the poison maker. Well, I'm sure things are hunky-dory in this town and nobody's poisoning each other all the time. So it is a little weird. You kind of have to go the Romeo and Juliet route, kind of being like, oh, you go to an apothecary, and you have to kind of convince an apothecary to make poison for you, because they're like, I really shouldn't be doing this. Or they are definitely just a poisoner on the side, and they definitely give it to like assassins and stuff like that. Which could be a very fun apothecary character to have as like a recurring NPC. Maybe in addition to, selling poisons to high-class assassins and things like that, maybe they are also kind of like an information broker. So you go to them and they know the scuttlebutt about what's happening in the less savory circles of people in the world, or at least in the area. So you got to make it more cheaper. We got to make it more available. You got to be able to get your hands on the stuff a lot easier. Especially with so many things that are just immune to it and or resistant to it. So they're resistant to it, and usually that means that they're going to have advantage on the save, and they're going to have lessened effects from a lot of the poison, especially poisons that just deal straight damage. So we make it cheaper and we make it more available. What else can we do to sort of gas up poison for those people who want to actually use their poisoner's kit? The other thing I'm looking at the wrong thing. That's why it's not the notes that I have. Yeah. Okay. So we gotta make it cheaper. We gotta make it more available. Make it, and this really, I guess, is more of like a sort of, or, harvestable, yeah, and craftable. Which means that you need to kind of put in dynamics in which there are things, because of course D&D doesn't really provide you that information, but or way to do this, but there is a way that you could be like, oh, you guys killed a giant spider, it's a venomous spider. Can we extract sort of the venom glands or the venom from this dead creature after we kill it? Or subdue it, whatever we're doing to it. Maybe you have to keep the creature alive to do it, which would be very interesting. And then, you know, milk it from the alive giant spider. You have to figure out how to subdue it, and now you've got yourself a little adventure to go on. But to make have something set up for them to be able to play a character who's interested in this, be actually able to harvest some of the things, and then get things that allow them to do those effects. Because a lot of these poisons are like that. You have the crawler mucus, oil of Taggart, serpent venom, purple worm poison, wyvern poison. Yeah. So you have a lot of these that are already pulled from animals and monsters and things like that. So we can lean into that, make sure that it's harvestable and craftable. And here's the thing, is that sometimes as a Dungeon Master or Game Master, I know I have definitely very much been guilty of this. Be like, ooh, I don't want to give them the ghoul paralytic touch kind of thing, because they're like, yeah, it's super powerful. It's like, yeah, but they're only going to get it, like, just give them one dose of it. They get to use it once. What happens when you introduce a finite resource, a rare finite resource to players? I don't know if you've ever played a video game, but people don't use their potions a lot. They'll end up in the end of the game and they'll have hundreds of potions and be like, well, you know, I was always just saving them. So they're going to use it the once, and if it goes off, it's going to be great if they remember to use it. And if they don't remember to use it, then it doesn't ever go off. So, I mean, you're kind of safe both ways. You're not in danger. You're actually safe both ways. It's either they get it, either it's one and done, and then which means they'll probably use it on the next guy they come across, which is probably not going to be your big bad of the entire campaign. It's probably going to be like, they might save it for a boss, which would be a cool end for it, especially if they got the thing on that adventure, or it was something from the previous adventure that they had spent a bunch of time like brewing it into that, making that part of the access too. Be like, oh, you need to harvest it, and then you also need to basically create a poison, turn it into an actually stable poison. We want to make it cheaper, more available. We want to make it harvestable and craftable, make it, you know, interesting to get. And because it's a very powerful thing, it's going to be a limited quantity anyways. Now, ideally, you don't want them to sell this, because as we saw, the price of poisons is insane. If you could just make poison, as you can with the Poison Maker's Kit, it's like, why would I do anything except make poison? I can make tons of poison. Basic poison sells for 100 gold. If I'm making 50 gold making basic poison, selling it at half price, I'm doing something right. But I'd be selling it at market price because it would be my business. So I'd sell it at 100 gold. So, you know, that's not what I want them to do. That's not what this is set up for to be. And usually if I have a player who's like, oh, I'm just going to do this thing to make money off of it, it's like, okay, then we're not going to make this like an engaging fun part of the game. It's like you're just putting coins in the piggy bank. That's fine. You can put coins in the piggy bank. And we'll just kind of, you can take some downtime and make some money. That's fine. It doesn't need to be an interesting part of the game then. But for those players who are like, no, I want to like do it and craft it so that way I have a bandolier of different types of poison, so I know the right poison for the right situation, and I can, you know, put it on my weapon and have the right monster with it. You know, the person who's getting real Witcher about stuff. And then the last thing we can kind of do to gas up poison is give ourselves like a a spell. We do a spell. Maybe a consumable, or even a poison that reduces resistance to poison. And a bit of a, we'll call this a pre-poison. A pre-poison poison. So how does that work exactly? The idea is that, okay, you have immune creatures. If you, let's say, this is a cool thing for, like, if you have a ranger or somebody like that who usually has arrows, maybe they're the person who has this kind of pre-poison consumable, or you have the wizard who has a very specific spell. Giving them something that's like, if you do this thing, it will actually reduce targets' resistances to poison, which will make the poison more effective and more likely to take part. Now, the rogue could also just be doing that. They could also make that their first attack of the combat and be like, oh, I put the pre-poison on, I stab the guy with the pre-poison, then on my next turn I put a different poison on and then stab him again, so I can give him that poison, which he'll be less likely to shrug off. But the idea is that, okay, so an immune creature will go down to resistant, go down to normal, go down to vulnerable. So you can use the pre-poison on anything. So even if you were just attacking a straight up commoner with poison, I don't know why you'd do that. Kind of a waste of poison. But you're hitting just a normal person who we'll assume has enough hit points at this point, and not just what a commoner has. So you would do that. You can still hit them with the pre-poison and take them from being just normal to it to being vulnerable to the poison, which in this case would mean something like they're going to have disadvantage on the Constitution saving throw to shrug off the effects of the poison, and they're going to take double damage from it, essentially. Which is a great way for a poison dealer to be like, oh, in combat it would take you maybe a round to apply this, but for every round after that you're using poison, it will be more useful. Now, do I think that you could do stack pre-poison? I don't know. My immediate inclination is to say no, but because I'm like, well, more of the same doesn't necessarily mean more of the effect. But I could see there's only very specific situations I think in which you would do that, which would be if something was immune to it. Which, if you were fighting a construct, and the construct's obviously immune to it, you hit it with the pre-poison, it becomes resistant to it. Now, at that point, you're like, do I start applying poison to it, knowing that it's still resistant to it? Or do I hit it with pre-poison again, knock it down to being just straight, just a normal enemy as far as poison is concerned? Maybe. But then you're taking at least 2 rounds, assuming you hit in both rounds, to do that, to get to the point where you can then legitimately start giving things poison. So it's kind of a non-starter by itself, unless it's like a big, you've got a very specific poison you're trying to use. And this is like a BBEG kind of guy that you're fighting. This construct or warforged or whatever it is, like this is the big bad guy. You know this is going to be a long, in-depth combat, and you're like, I have the 2 rounds to burn to be a lot more effective throughout the rest of the combat. But in the normal combat, if you were fighting like a bunch of like animated armors, you'd be like, yeah, I'm not going to use the pre-poison on them because I'd rather just deal the damage to them because they're mookier kind of enemies. They're not worth the dosage, essentially. Like, I would rather just overwhelm them with damage first, of any kind. When you just go, I'm not going to waste my poison on those kinds of creatures. They're not worth it. So, yeah. This is, I think, probably the best idea. If I was going to make a poisoner character, which sounds fun, I have a poisoner NPC, be able to make it cheaper, more effective, so it's something you're going to be doing all the time. Maybe not on every single attack. again, especially once you have that pre-poison there, and be like, then you have a decision to make. Be like, do I apply pre-poison so I can do poison damage in this combat, or maybe I don't, and I just kind of use normal combat for this one. It's one of those things where it's like you'll have a list of kind of different poisons that kind of do different things, and so you'll be like, which one of these might be useful in this combat? And if I knew that, like something that maybe does paralytic, or something that maybe disadvantage on strength checks, or who knows? I mean, the world is your oyster. You can kind of do whatever you want with the poisons. You can have them that kind of give conditions. You can make up a lot of your own poisons, which should probably be on here. Let's put that on there. Make up your own poisons. We'll just say homebrew. Homebrew your poisons. Again, when you have, they take stuff from venom and poison out of monsters, poison sacks out of monsters, you can use that stuff and have them, like, that gives them the effect of it. That doesn't mean that they necessarily have explicitly the amount of poison damage that monster stat block did, but they have something that feels thematically like it came from that monster. So if you have something that does, like the carrion crawler mucus, I think it's a paralytic, isn't it? Probably on here. Crawler mucus. This poison must be harvested from a dead or incapacitated crawler. Subjected to this poison must succeed on DC 13 paralyzing save. If there be poisoned for 1 minute, the poison creature is paralyzed. Yes. So it's a paralytic. So a paralytic is really good, by the way. Paralyzed is bad condition. You don't want to be paralyzed. Being able to get that stuff. And it also gives you inbred like, it builds its own adventure hooks. Be like, oh, you want a poison that is a very specific thing. Okay, there's a very specific monster you know of that you need to get your hands on, and then it becomes an investigation. Okay, where's that monster at? How do we get there? Is there anything? Are there other adventures we can do in that area while we get there? And kind of becomes a full-fledged side quest kind of thing, or something was like, oh, we really want to take on this big bad guy. It would be really nice to have this paralytic poison, something that would slow them down, maybe make the fight easier. Alright, well, let's go hunt some carrion crawlers first. Let's go find those. We'll get some poison from there. We'll get some poison from them, their mucus from them, and then you can distill that into a poison. We'll come back, then we'll try to fight the big bad. Now, while you're doing all that stuff, the big bad's over here kind of doing their thing, and things get worse because they're not dealing with the adventure. Basic Dungeon Master, Game Master kind of stuff when you're running campaigns. You guys put your attention over here, something happens over here while you're not thinking about it. Not big swings, like little baby swings, little baby swings. Just like things, just enough to show them that, like, hey, when you don't deal with a problem, things happen. Is there anything else that we kind of want to talk about that? Yeah, so I've got a list here about some homebrew poison, so I'm just gonna make the list real quick. And then we can talk about it. Let's see. Okay, so yeah, these are just some of the things that I just floated off the top of my head when I was thinking about this and just jotted down very quickly. So we can talk about it a little bit. So you can homebrew your poisons. Not every poison just needs to do the poison condition and or poison damage. You can again, one of the great things about being the Dungeon Master or Game Master is that the entire game system is your bin of Lego, and you can go in there and find just the right piece to match with just what you're trying to do. That is the strength of playing with a system like this, is that you can just go grab something that exists and tweak it a little bit. So I thought about other stuff that happens in D&D that we don't really typically associate with poison. Like things that give you disadvantage on specific saves. Lots of spells do that. There's no reason that you don't have something that's like, we'd also put in here specific saves or attacks. And I mean, poison just in general does all checks. So having a specific stat, saves or attacks, be like, oh, this one is makes the person more like languid, so they're not as agile, so they have disadvantage on their dexterity saving throws, or their disadvantage on dexterity attacks, maybe. You can do conditions that are other than poison, right? We have paralyzed, that's one of them. We talked about doing stunned, and generally you don't want to give out stun because stun's a bad condition for everybody all around. It's not very fun at the table. Blinded, deafened. Deafened's not that bad of a condition, but blind is pretty bad. Other conditions, it'd be fun if it was a prone poison. Like your legs are asleep and you can't stand up. That would be very funny. Like it seems to like kind of put your legs to sleep, like your lower body to sleep. That would be a very interesting poison. It could be fun though, but only the lower limbs, so they can still fight, but they just can't like stand up because their legs are asleep. Very interesting poison. Speed reduction, yeah, anything that's going to do that is going to make them slowed, right? That's the slowed condition. But you can also just do a speed reduction, which is, I guess, is kind of the two different ways to skin that cat. It is essentially the same. So maybe speed reduction is not. Because it could be, and because you could also just say it gives you the grappled condition, which makes your speed 0. Do things like ability score damage. We have monsters, the infamous CR1 shadows. Do that, where they do strength damage, and as I can tell you, who played an NPC not that long ago, who got batted around by some shadows, died. Yeah, very easy to die to shadows because they only need to hit you a handful of times to do it. And it's actually, I feel like, much more likely that they're going to kill you that way than through hit point damage. But yeah, you can do straight up ability score damage. So some of these, and ability score damage and some of these things, a condition can come and go pretty quickly. Something like ability score damage, because of the nature of it, that would be a very potent, powerful poison, because usually ability score damage you have to heal through a restoration spell, or you get it through like 1 point back per long rest or something like that. It's very slow to get that ability score back. The unfortunate side effect of that is it can make a character unplayable if they have taken a bunch of ability score damage, depending on what ability score it is. If you have a cleric that like loses all their wisdom and can't really cast spells, you have a barbarian who doesn't have any strength. I'm thinking of like a rogue that doesn't have any dexterity. So you have to be kind of careful about it, because it's very easy to nuke a PC with something like this. Now, unlike something like the shadows, presumably you got to use one use of poison for every hit. So it's less likely that you're going to get a bunch of stacks on top of that from a PC perspective. Or if they do it, they're doing it, but it will also cost them quite a bit of money and or resources to do that. Depending on how much of that poison they're buying and how much they're making. What their stock's kind of like. Proficiency loss. So proficiency loss can be a fun one that comes up. This is a nice one to, if you want to represent a poison that like clouds the mind or something like that, or makes you uncoordinated. You're like, oh, well, you lost your proficiency. It can be really bad if you do, like, you lost your, high paladin, you've lost your proficiency to heavy armor, even though paladins very early become immune to disease. But, there's a couple levels where they might have plate armor, and then you can hit them with this, and they'd lose their proficiency for heavy armor, which would be, gives them a bunch of negatives to, like, attacks and stuff like that. It's real bad. But you can also do it to represent things like, oh, you've lost your proficiency and or expertise rogue in stealth. So you're not nearly as good at hiding as you were because you got hit with this poison, and maybe you're not as dexterous, you're just kind of fumbly around, but only in this one specific way. Like, you can't be on your tiptoes and be super quiet and hide and super small. Maybe. You gotta find that spot to make the narrative visualization of what's happening make sense. And then -1d4 to base AC. Be like, there's nothing that really does this. If I'm looking for something new way to make my players afraid of what the monsters can do, like, oh, this guy just attacks your base AC. He doesn't attack your armor. He doesn't attack your hit points. He just makes you easier to hit for everybody else. This would be good for like a larger boss monster who does this poison to characters or doesn't affect like this to characters. And that's most of what they do. They don't do a ton of damage. Instead, you have a bunch of like mooks. You have a bunch of like ads, bunch of like little minions that rush in, and they're the ones who do the damage. So the longer the combat goes on, your AC starts to tick down and down and down and down, and you become easier to hit. And the mooks are able, who don't hit very hard and don't hit very often, start hitting more often, and they start chipping away at hit points. And it's a slow death as they sort of crawl over you just by sheer numbers and wear you down. And then that's a cool idea for you have the player characters who can use all their big spells and big abilities to kind of like shift the battle, change things that we're going to drop a restoration spell in the middle of combat sort of thing. And then the deal of like, how do we kill all these monsters and stay away from the guy who makes our AC worse? And then combat becomes kind of a little puzzle for them to play with and solve. Or overcome, I should say. Not solve. Problems are solved. And problems only have one solution, ideally. An obstacle is just something you gotta get past. That's our challenge. But yeah, that's it for gassing on points. It was just like, there's a lot of stuff we could do here. There's a lot of fertile ground with poisons that really, it's something that just really gets overshot of, especially in 5e in 2024, but also it's just a thing that contemporary D&D doesn't have. I don't even think that old school D&D has a super good answer for poison stuff. But of course, old school's answer will always be sort of like, hey, you live and die pretty quick, so hey, sucks to suck. Sometimes you get a save or die mechanic and your guy doesn't make it, and sometimes you throw a save versus die mechanic on a monster, and sometimes they don't make it. But the thing is, like, you're going to be churning through so many characters so quickly anyways, because that's just the style of play, really, is that it's really easy to die. But if you're getting into combat, you should be as dirty and nasty in combat as possible to try to come out the other side of it. Which includes using poison. So it feels very on brand for that OSR kind of feel. But yeah, that's everything I think I wanted to talk about today. So a slightly shorter stream than we usually do, but we kind of charged right through it pretty good. So we had gassing and poison. We talked about this. How do we make poison more useful for PCs, because it's way too expensive and way too many monsters are just outright immune and even more resistant to poison. You get the poisoner's kit. What are you supposed to do with that basic poison? It gives people the poison condition, but that poison condition only works on checks, so it's not super useful for combat. Right? I'm not making that up. That is the poison condition, right? It's the first level of exhaustion, basically. It's going to be very silly if I'm wrong about this. I'm pretty sure that says. Let's just look it up. Well, it is attack rolls. Okay, it is attack rolls, so that is way more useful. I saw it before I even get it. Attack rolls and ability checks. Okay, so the ability checks part was right. They do also get a disadvantage on it, but not saves. We'll keep that part in there. Yeah, saves or attacks. We'll leave it in there because that's like a different type of things. Because you can then bundle those two together very easily. Because saves is the one thing the poison condition doesn't do. So if you have a very specific, we can do that on specific saves and attacks. On specific, we'll say ability. Sure. So you hit them with the poison that makes them maybe have lower con saves. And then you can start throwing more poison at them with con saves that just deal straight damage so you can do more damage to them. And now being a poisoner is kind of cool and gives you this thing. This is really the crux of it though right here, is finding out some way, some spell or consumable or a pre-poison that the poisoner can make that reduces resistances to the poison. So you can you can throw it on a creature who's immune to poison and bring that down to make them only resistant. For bigger, badder monsters, you can take, characters who are flat against it or resistant against it and make them just normal against it, make them vulnerable against it. So if you have big combats with big monsters, you might want to do this multiple times to take a creature that was immune to it and make it at least all the way down to normal, even vulnerable if you want to. So if you really want to make sure that you have a really great poison and you really want to make sure it hits. And so you do a lot of pre-work, pre-production up to that point. And then when it's time, you hit it with that. The thing that makes it stunned or whatever. But it's going to take you a number of times to make sure you can get there. And you also got to eat through all those legendary resistances anyways, probably in a fight like that. I'm going to make sure that poisons are cheaper and more available. They're way too expensive. They're in hundreds, if not thousands, of gold coins, which means that they're only kind of useful towards once you start getting towards the middle of the levels, because that's when characters will have enough of that kind of dosh that they can throw away on something like a one-use poison. And at that point, they're fighting. So many of the things that they're fighting are absolutely immune to poison or resistant to poison that now poison doesn't make sense. So poison makes sense more on the lower levels, but is priced to be in sort of like the mid levels. We want to make it cheaper and more available for that low-level play. We also want to make it harvestable and craftable. This should be a thing that if you have a person who's like, I want to play a poisoner and I have the poisoner's kit, they're going to be the person who's like, can I harvest the poison out of the wyvern's barb? Yeah, let's make a check for the gland and see if you can get it out. If you don't poison yourself with it and you're able to get something that's actually viable, and then you'll need a little bit of downtime to distill that poison and make it basically shelf stable. That way you can use it and apply it to weapons in the future. I would probably just go with most poisons that any poisoner is going to create are going to be injury ones and or contact ones. Just because ingestion poison, the idea that the poison table was set up in 5e by somebody who thought about poison for 2 seconds, knowing that lots of poisons have to get into your body in some way. It's not like, only some poisons are fatal when they're ingested, but you can put them on your skin and they don't do anything. There are other things that really kind of only work on your skin, or you need skin contact, like things that are like poison oak kind of things. Like obviously that's a contact poison effect. Or having other things that like you need to get it into the bloodstream, and that's like through injury generally. You need to get it into their body, into their blood. Snake venom's like that. That's how it works. So having those different ways is like, that's cool for the table. But D&D is not particularly interesting when you're trying to figure out how do I get this poison cooked into this guy's stew. Like, it's fine, it's just I wouldn't be I've never seen any player or been a player who's been like, how do I construct a situation in which I would ever use this poison? Like, it's nice to have, but the likelihood it's going to come up is really, really low. Unless you're playing a very specific type of campaign where there's a lot of like courtly intrigue and poisoning that way of food and drink, then that's a lot more common. But for most sort of like swashbuckling, classic adventure, dungeon delving, flying ship kind of weirdness that is D&D, what we would call kind of the iconic D&D experience, not poisoning a lot of people's food and drinks. It's just not going to come up very often. So making sure that, like, I would say that everything that I had them craftable, unless it was for a very specific poison, I would make most of them injury or contact. Most of them injury, and if some of them contact. The idea would be like, because that's what the poisoner wants to do, is they want to put they want to dip their arrows into poison and put it on their blade and stab people with it. Like that's the fantasy they want to do, which does talk about sort of like design 101, identifying and understanding the fantasy when you're building out mechanics to match that fantasy. Extra Credits had a really great video about game design, which is useful for video games. In that case, they were talking about like a tabletop card game, but understanding those things is very useful for D&D. There's also a Matt Colville video that's very similar to that he does about firearms from many years ago. And I have some notes on that sort of stuff as well when I think about how to design things. And the key thing is like, okay, what is the fantasy that you want to happen? In the Matt Colville video, the fantasy that I talked about with firearms in D&D is like a Wild West gunslinger. That's most people's fantasy of cool character with gun. And then you build mechanics to emulate that. So that way when you engage with the mechanics as a player, you do stuff that makes you feel like the cool gunslinger. And if you can get them to the point where just by engaging in the game, the way the game is designed, makes them immediately fall into the fantasy where they don't have to do a lot of the work themselves to try to make that happen. Like just playing the game will push them towards that fantasy. Then it's very well designed. That doesn't mean necessarily it will be fun, but it will be well designed. So there is always the fun aspect that we have to think about too when we're doing design too. So hopefully for somebody who wanted to be a poisoner, this stuff would be fun, that you're looking for monsters, and when you come across things like spiders and wyverns and carrion crawlers, that you're like, ooh, they have cool effects. Can I get those effects from them so that way I have those effects? That's the fantasy, is that you find the poison, you make the poison, you're able to use it, put it on your weapons, coat things, and ammunition, arrows, crossbow bolts, that kind of stuff, and are able to poison other people and do cool things like that. Very similar to kind of that Witcher potion kind of vibe too. Blade oils, things of that nature. So yeah. But that's everything I wanted to talk about. We talked about the gassing and poison. Then before that, we talked about when to roll, when to hold, and when to fail forward. No consequences for failure. Avoid infinite retries. If they have to pass to get past the bottleneck or dead end, or the adventure doesn't go anywhere, don't call for the roll. If the attempt is way too easy or mundane, that's not worth rolling for, or if it's too difficult or fantastic, well, there's a big difference between jumping over a puddle of water and jumping across the Grand Canyon. Both are examples of when not to roll. Can I jump the Grand Canyon? No, you can't. Can I jump this puddle? Yeah, you don't need to roll for that. You jump over the puddle. And then we talked about sort of the fail forward aspect, which is using effort, which is something that kind of comes out of ICRPG, Index Card RPG. The idea that you take a DC, you multiply it, and then every roll after that is no longer a pass-fail binary, but a progress towards an end goal. It's like, you will accomplish this thing, but it may take you some time, and then we start looking at consequences for taking this much time to do the thing. What is a bad thing that happens, or a potential bad thing that happens because it's taking you so long to do this thing? And yeah, that's the stream. That's everything we want to talk about. We did it. We hit it. I'm going to be taking a look at this, trying to make some notes so I can maybe talk about it. Check that out. I also have some other things that are kind of on the docket that I want to look forward to in the future. I want to talk about sort of my Hex Dungeon Adventure design, which is sort of my primary, or I guess default way of how I design Dungeons and Adventures for the most part now. We'll talk a little bit about that. I just need to write it up in a more coherent way. Like, I know it, but I need to write it in a way so you can know it. And that's where I'll need to do some work. Is get things out of my head and onto the page. That way you can see it. You can see how it works. It's a little bit like 5-room dungeon, but a little bit more expansive because I've talked about this before, my sort of go-to when I'm making adventures, I try to make it what I consider a 2 to 3 session adventure. And like 2 sessions if they go really, really fast, 3 sessions if they go pretty normal. Could be 4 sessions or longer if they go really slow. But in generally, it's going to be the 2 to 3 session, and I think that's a good cadence for an adventure to me. It's long enough that it's not a one and done, but it's also short enough that the players are unlikely to forget the beginning of the adventure by the time they get to the end. Because you don't want the adventure where you get 5 sessions in and you go, wait, why are we in the dungeon again? And you don't want that. So trying to avoid that. But yeah, that's stuff that's coming up, but I gotta make notes on that stuff, so we'll see. But thanks for hanging out with me, guys. As always, this is fun, kind of talk about the stuff. We'll have another week of D&D on the docket, and then we'll talk about that. Probably talk about some of this other stuff, but I assume we'll be doing this next week, so come back and check me out. If in the meantime, we got lots of other videos and stuff on the channel that you can check out. Like, give us a subscribe, shout us out online, do all that fun stuff. We have the blog, redrag@fiend.com. If you want to throw me a couple bucks, we got the coffee link down in the description. Yeah, I got some pay what you want things over on DriveThruRPG. I need to put more stuff up on there. It's just who's got the time. But yeah, I think that's everything. I'll see you guys next time, alright? Bye-bye.